Hello friends and followers, I am cooperative divorce attorney Erika Englund.
And I'm Neil Forrester, certified family law specialist.
And together we are part of the Split Decisions team here designed to help you create your very best divorce life in any way that divorce impacts your life.
Absolutely.
Whether it's your own divorce, you're a child of divorce, or you have a boyfriend, friend, family member who's going through it, we want to help you make better split decisions and so that you can help them too.
Absolutely.
And today we have 5 totally effective and really important tips for reducing conflict related to child support. Child support itself has the propensity to generate a lot of conflict between parents.
It really does.
The payment of support and how that goes and how it's used. And so whenever possible, there are ways that you can lower that conflict or buffers you can put in place.
Absolutely.
As a family law mediator, I say conflict is contagious, which means if there's one area where you have parents in conflict, it's very easy for that to spill into more areas and become a greater conflict overall. So if there are places you can put in stoppers for that conflict, we want you to do it. So 5 tips for you today, totally effective for reducing child support conflict.
Let's hear it. Number 1.
Tip number 1, I know you are a highly qualified courtroom attorney, but tip number 1 is if you can settle child support disputes by agreement.
Don't come see me.
And why is that?
Well, because it's going to make it easier for you to kind of define the parameters of the support that you're paying, and you're probably going to have an easier time enforcing that agreement if the two of you agree on what that child support should be.
Compliance is higher. And so knowing you had some say also in the outcome, you didn't just turn it over to a judge, but you had some say in how that child support agreement was put together, is important in empowering you to stick to your agreement, whether you're the person paying or receiving support.
Yeah, even if you're in court, I mean, the court is going to enforce a guideline child support order, which is automatic, and so you should also familiarize yourself with what you're kind of looking at in terms of what a guideline child support order is going to be, so you can make some agreements around that. You don't want to be surprised by a black robe ordering you to pay a bunch more money than you thought you were going to have to.
Yes, and when Neil says guideline support, what he's referring to is that child support is actually set with a calculator. It's computer software. So in some instances, it can be difficult to figure out what factors go into the guideline. But in very, very many instances, it is an issue that can be settled out of court because you're really using a computer software system, and it makes it easier probably for you to predict what the judge will do.
Absolutely, yeah.
So number 2 way that we want you to reduce conflict around child support is please don't forget the details. You have an amount of support that's due. What else do you need in your order?
You need a start date for that amount, whatever that start date's going to be. You need, if you've got multiple kids, you need to have an allocation between the kids as to how much of that child support you've agreed to pay is going to go to each child. It's not always a 50-50 breakdown.
Almost never a 50-50 breakdown. And this way, when one child leaves the home and ages out of child support jurisdiction, parents automatically know how much support to allocate to the younger child and don't need to go back to court or back to mediation.
Such an important thing. I've had more than one case where there's been an unallocated order that I've had to untangle, and it costs a lot of money, frankly.
And by the way, in California, no end date for child support. There are some specific jurisdictional factors that are going to apply with when child support ends, so parents are actually not allowed to include an end date that is earlier than what the law requires.
Absolutely.
But start date, absolutely. When the payment is made, if there's extra payments on bonuses or commissions, very important, including allocation to have all of these in your order.
Agreed.
All right, number 3, understand child support is just for base living expenses, meaning that
there are extras, extracurricular activities, unreimbursed health care.
My children just do nothing but take my money. They have private school, they go to the doctor, they go to the dentist, they go to the school carnival and have a pony ride. It's unbelievable how much goes into supporting children that's not just room and board. And child support is essentially room and board.
Yep, that's what it is.
So first of all, our first suggestion is to understand that child support's for base living expenses. So all of these educational, extracurricular, medical, dental, our expenses are going to be on top of the child support order that is paid.
That's right.
And to that end, number 4, be specific about how you're allocating those expenses between parents and which expenses are and are not permissible. So as a mediator, I've had parents say things like, this is how we're going to split driver's ed costs, or we're going to allow our children to do one extracurricular or athletic event per quarter or per year. So there's some guidelines in there.
At least guidelines can be very helpful. You can be as specific as you want to be, though. I've seen more than once where a family's gotten into trouble because they said something like, all extracurriculars will be shared equally between the parents, and then all of a sudden one parent is scheduling their child for 270 different extracurricular activities and expecting contribution from the other parent. And not only does that create an unnecessary expense, but it also impedes on parenting time, and that's just as bad.
Absolutely. And then creates more conflict between the parents, which creates more problems for the children and more money for the lawyers. So you can see where that's going. Understanding child supports for base expenses, and then that other expenses on top should be as specifically allocated as possible, is really helpful. Having said that, child support can always change, and this includes allocation of extra expenses. So it might not be a great use of your time if you have a very young child to be talking about things like driver's ed, prom, the high school yearbook.
Might be getting a little ahead of ourselves.
A little ahead of yourselves. So really it's instead focusing on whatever your child's immediate needs are, rather than looking too far out.
Agreed. I mean, there are going to be some things that you can plan for at any stage of your child's life, and you should look at those things. But don't get too far ahead, and understand always that you're going to be able to come back and modify those amounts as time goes on.
And then one more aspect to consider with additional expenses, we're talking about extracurriculars being allocated by agreement between the parents. Medical, dental, therapeutic expenses, these are usually going to be shared by the parents. So you may have a dispute about whether something was an elective or a non-elective procedure, but essentially whether you're the person who took the child to the dentist or not, the fact that the child incurred a non-discretionary medical, dental, or therapeutic expense means that that's typically going to be shared according to however you've allocated that.
That's right.
And allocation of these expenses does not have to be 50-50. You might allocate them otherwise, but if you don't allocate them otherwise, specifically, then what does the court do?
The court's going to split them right in half.
So number 5 tip to help you manage child support conflict, and we really want to see you manage it, is to have some way in place to track payment of support and to track payment and reimbursement of extracurriculars. So you've got a support order in place, great. You have all the details in there, like the start date, the allocation between the children. You have in there extracurricular activities, and you know how you're allocating them between the parents. That's awesome. You've done well, but now it's important to track support and to track reimbursement of extracurriculars.
Yeah, you've got to follow through. Some of the things, the worst case scenarios that I've seen is parents go for 6 or 7 or 8 months after an initial order. They're collecting all their receipts. They've got all the money in line, and then they're telling the other side they haven't paid me in 6 months for all these debts that I've taken on, and yet they have not shared any receipts, and there's been no way for the two parents to really reconcile their accounts.
It's an accounting nightmare.
No communication.
The other problem that I'll see sometimes in mediation with parents that are more collaborative is that one parent doesn't really track expenses because he or she's thinking, well, you did the haircut, but I did the soccer shoes, and then you did the pictures. Then we have another parent who is tracking expenses very specifically, and suddenly there's a reimbursement owed because one person is tracked and one person hasn't. So getting on the same page with tracking is helpful, and if you don't want to do that and you don't like accounting and you don't like Google Docs, guess what, everybody? I have a great way for you to handle it. My former husband and I share a bank account that is just for the children, and we contribute a set amount of money to that bank account every month. And then whenever they have expenses, we write them directly out of the account. So whether it's private school tuition or they have a dentist appointment, even for some parents, they have birthday party gifts. It can be as down to whatever level of detail you want. But he and I don't need to track anything between the two of us because it's all there. If there's ever a dispute that something wasn't used for the benefit of the children, we could deal with that specifically. But it's a very nice system for anyone who doesn't love receipts, accounting, and Google Docs.
It's literally being on the same page.
Being on the same page. And so that would be just setting, again, a joint bank account, a checking account that you and your former, the child's parent, are both on. You contribute an agreed amount. Both of you have access to it. You have a checkbook, you have a debit card, and you're able to use that as agreed without having to do any other tracking.
That's a great idea.
We are hopeful that by giving you some parameters to reduce conflict with child support, that it's actually going to reduce conflict all kinds of ways with parenting and make your divorce life better. So just to recap those for you. Number one, if you can, reach agreement.
Number one.
Number two, include the details. Start date, when it's paid, how to allocate it between the children, commissions, bonuses. All of these details.
Very important.
Number three, understand this is just for base living expenses. You're going to have all the child's other expenses on top of that. So number four, think about how you want to allocate those, what's agreed and not agreed. And number five, have a system in place to track the payment of expenses and the payment of the child's any other additional support or expenses.
And there's going to be a lot of those.
There's trust me, I have two children. And they're very young to be so expensive.
You'd think they'd be cheaper when they're younger.
Yeah, and they're not bringing any money into the family either.
Got to get them working.
A couple of years. We have more information for you in addition to this blog at splitdecisions.pro. We also come to you every single week with great divorce information about love, life, kids, and money from both the cooperative divorce perspective and the family law courtroom attorney perspective.
The litigator.
So until we meet again, Divorce Network, be well.
Have a great week.